Okay, so this training is for room supervisors and proctors. So room supervisors and proctors. And in this particular training, we are talking only about room supervisors and proctors that are handling accommodation testing. There is a separate video, separate training for those that are room supervisors and proctors for standard time testing. So this is only for accommodation. So you should have your manual. Your test coordinator gave you manuals, and it's very important that you read this manual from from cover to cover. Now, there are different timing codes, so we're going to talk about the different timing codes. So make sure that the manual that the room supervisor gave you has a sticky note. The sticky note indicates what is your timing code that you're going to administer. So there are different timing codes. For example, this is timing code 7. There's a timing code 6, a timing code 5, and so on. So the sticky notes are important for that reason. You don't want to miss timing. A missed timing will cause some issues. So make sure you are using the correct timing code. Okay, now first thing I want to look at in this particular one is a sequence of the test. So let's go to page 41. So on page 41, so let's find page 41. And on page 41, where it says sequence and timing of test. So let's look at that. Okay, so the order in which you give the test is important. Test number 1 should be English. So the first test students take is English. Once they complete the English test, they go to test 2, which is math. Okay, so again, test 2 is math. Once the student takes test 2, math, they then go to reading, test 3. And then after test 3, they go to science test 4. So the sequence, the order matters. So whenever you're giving the accommodated testing, that you got to make sure on this form right here, when you fill out this form, you make it smaller. So when you fill out that form, you have to make sure that if student A is listed here, that these dates are in order. So English 1 is done first, then, English is done first, math is done second, reading is done third, and science is done last. We don't do the writing test, so you don't have to worry about this column. Okay, so the sequence is important. Okay, let's talk about where it says start and time allowed for each test. All right, so the start time, it says verbal instructions may begin as soon as all examinees have been identified and seated. So once you have, if you look at this form right here on the back page, once you've checked in all of your students, and should have no more than 8, usually a student with an IEP will also have small group. Not always, but if the student has small group, then there should be no more than 8 students on this list. Once you've checked in the students and you verified that they are on here, that you've listed them here, that they are listed, once they're all in, then you can begin the test. All right, so it is recommended that the verbal instructions start no later than 9 a.m. So that's going to be set by your test coordinator. In all rooms to ensure adequate testing time. So their timing codes, remember we talked about timing codes. There are different timing codes. So there's a timing code in which each test you can give at most 3 hours. There's one in which it's only time and a half, and there's one in which it's just regular time. And then there's some which stop the clock break. So it's very important that you know what timing code you have. So start time may be adjusted for accommodations and or support administration as needed. Okay, so time allowed for each test. Each test has a set allowance based on the timing guidelines, the timing code. it is being administered on it. The time specified in the verbal is specified in the verbal instructions for each test, and you must follow it exactly. If you are administering the ACT no writing, which we are, ignore the writing test section. So there's a writing test section in there, just ignore that. Okay, so next section is called timing the test. Each room supervisor is responsible, so the room supervisor, not the proctor, the room supervisor is responsible for timing the test in his or her own room. Timing or reading the verbal instructions is not to be controlled from a central location for multiple rooms. So usually in EBR, we've never had that issue. So each room supervisor times their test, and there's only one room supervisor per room. Okay, so let's talk about the timing. All right, so if I go to timing code 7, which is on page 106, timing code 7, page 106, which is test 1 English, you will see that for timing code 7, it says time and a half over multiple days. So if I go to timing code 7, you'll see that there are 70 minutes for this test for English 1. All right, students take English 1. Whenever they're done with English 1, if it's the next day, then they would then come back, take math, and that time is right here it says 90 minutes. All right, so it's very important. It's very important that you check those times, that the times are correct that you're using. So for example, if I go to timing code, let's say 5, timing code 5, and let's say I look at math. Remember, math was 90 minutes in the other one? Well, in math over here, it is 60 minutes in this one. All right, so the timing code dictates how many minutes you have. Okay, so keep that in mind. So it's very important that you have your sticky note, that the test coordinator put a sticky note in your timing code for your timing code. Okay, you also need some timepieces. You cannot use your cell phone. Cell phones are not allowed in the room by students or by room supervisors and proctors. No one in that room is supposed to have a cell phone. So your room supervisor needs to provide you with a watch, a timer, whatever it needs to be. But each room needs to have 2 timepieces as a precaution in the event one fails. ACT recommends that one of these be an interval timer or a stopwatch. Do not use a cell phone as one of your timepieces. Okay, the next part, accurately timing the test. Record the actual start time and stop times for each examinee on each test and calculate the minutes each examinee used on that test. All right, what that means is this. If I go back to the room report, and on this page of the room report, this page here, you are to state the examinee's name. So the examinee should already be listed here. The timing code, all these timing codes need to be the same. Remember, you cannot test different timing codes in the same room. So this is, if you're doing timing code 7, all this should be timing code 7. You need to put the date, see where it says date in minutes for each test. So if English was given on March 17th, then you'd put 3/17 and how long it took that student to take the test. So if it took that student to take only 30 minutes, you'd put 30. If student number 2 took 22 minutes, you'd put 22. So all these could be different. Now, if a student took the whole time and time was called, then you would put the whatever time that was here. So if it's 60 minutes, you put 60, 60, 60, 60, if all of them were that situation. Then the same thing for test 2. You'd put the date. So let's say the date that this student took test 2 was the 18th. So you put 3/18 and how many minutes it took that student. Okay, so you do it for test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. And then over here, see where it says total minutes? You would add up all those minutes. So you need a calculator. You cannot use your cell phone. Do not take your cell phone out during in the classroom where there are tests. Students talk. If you're not supposed to have it, it is an irregularity. Tests can be voided. There could be investigations. So no cell phone. Use a calculator to count these minutes and put that here. Now this column is only for stop the clock breaks, so that's another discussion. Timing code 7, by the way, if you do have, and we're talking about timing code 7 in this case, there's no stop the clock break. Stop the clock break is only involved with timing code 5, and only a portion of timing code 5. There are two things with timing code 5. So if you have timing code 5, that's a different scenario. Okay, so record the actual start and stop times for each examinee on each test and calculate the minutes each examinee used on that test. Okay? All right, so the total minutes from examinee start test 1 to examinee stop on test 1. All examinees in the room must begin each test at the same time. So, if all these students here are taking test 1, then they all must start at the same time. If a student finishes early, and let's say you're giving 2 tests in one day, if a student finishes early, they cannot go to test 2. Every examinee must start test 2 at the same time. Every examinee must start test 3 at the same time. Every examinee must start test 4 at the same time. They could be different days depending on if there are absences and all that, but if you're giving test 1 to a group of students, they must start at the same time. They'll finish at different times. Those are the minutes that go here, but they will start at the same time. So test 2, they need to start at the same time. They're going to end at different times, so that's where these minutes are going to be different. Okay. All examiners in the room must begin each test at the same time. For example, if you're administering test 1, all examiners in the room must be working on test 1. If all examinees in the room complete the test before time is called, you may begin the next test or dismiss them if this is the last test for the day. So if you have a timing code where there's only one test given, then you just dismiss them. If they're about to take test 2, then if they're all finished and there's still time left, then go to test 2, but they all have to be finished. Before you announce 5 minutes remaining and before you call stop, check your timepiece carefully against the time you have written down and verify it with the other timepiece. If a proctor is in the room, the proctor is to double check the room supervisor's timing because you don't want any missed timings. Make sure you record the actual times you made your announcements on the administration report. So if you look at the administration report here, let's see where it would be located. Okay, so I don't see where that would be located. Let's see. Make sure you record the actual times you made your announcements on the administration report. On the standard time, there is a place for that. I don't see a place for that on this one. You may post the start and stop times or time allowed for each test on the board if one is available. Verify your calculation before writing the time on the board. Do not write the time remaining on the board as it can be confusing depending on when the examinees check it. Announcing time remaining. A verbal announcement of time remaining must be made either 30 minutes and or, so depending on your timing code, depends on the timing code. So it's either going to be 30 minutes or 5 minutes, and it's in the instruction manual before the end of each test, and see the appropriate verbal instructions. It is important to give the time remaining announcement accurately as examinees rely on it to pace themselves. All right, we don't do breaks for writing. This refers to writing. Now remember, this is accommodations, so usually you're going to give test 1, then the next day or whenever it is, the next one's going to be test 2. With standard time, there's a break between test 2 and 3, but for accommodations, there's going to be no break unless you're giving one of the times, one of the standard, one of the um, times is all day. So in that case, you would give a break, and that would be for the EL students. And I think it's timing code 6. So timing code 6, if you're the one that has timing code 6, if you look at timing code 6, where it says timing code 6 is time and a half, single session. That single session means 1 day. So usually those are going to be your EL students, your English learners that don't have a disability. They're going to be timing code 6. They have to take the test in 1 day. So there is going to be a break between test 2 and 3 for timing code 6. So if you have timing code 6, which some of you will, so timing code 6, there's a break between test 2 and 3 for timing code 6. All right, now let's go to the part where they start talking about the verbal instructions, and this is where all timing codes begin, and that's going to be on page 54. So on page 54. So verbal instructions, so all of you, everyone giving the accommodations test will start on page 54. All right, so let's look at what it says. So verbal instructions for all timing codes begin here. Do not skip ahead. So hopefully at least a week. It could be 2 weeks. Your test coordinator will give you this manual. It's very important you read this manual. So verbal instructions for all timing codes begin here. Do not skip ahead. This section contains verbal instructions to be read to examinees and instructions for staff activities during testing. Familiarize yourself with these instructions and practice regarding them before test day. All right, if you are testing more than one examinee in the same room, all examinees must have the same timing code. So that's the discussion we had earlier right here. All these timing codes have to be the same. All examinees in the room must begin each test at the same time. So if you're about to start English 1, then they must all start at the same time. For math, they must all start at the same time. So if they start at 9, all of them must start at 9. They're going to finish at different times, but they must all start at the same time. Before you begin reading the verbal instructions, make sure you have the correct test booklets. And so there's going to be a circle symbol on the cover of the accommodated test booklet. So there's accommodated test booklets and there's standard time test booklets. Accommodated test booklets have the circle on them. Make sure you have the correct test administration form. So there is, yours is going to be accommodations. So that's the one you need. There's one for standard time, and standard time looks like this. So that's the one for standard time. But what you need is the one that says accommodations. That's the one you need. So we'll have this on the front page. So notice it says A for accommodations. You have an irregularity report. The irregularity reports, and your test coordinator should have made copies of these just in case. Hopefully you're not going to have any. But the irregularity report is at the end of the manual, and it's on page 127. So on page 127, and so it says ACT State District Irregularity Report. So notice that if there's an irregularity, you've got to complete all of this information. Your test coordinator reviews it, adds stuff to it if needed, and you're going to have to, the room supervisor signs here, test coordinator signs here. But that's the irregularity report. So notice there are individual irregularities, and there's something called group irregularities. All right, so let's go back to this page on page 54. All right. The non-test portions of the answer document were completed before test day. So remember, when a student for ACT, when they take the test, whatever day they take the test, all these non-test portions of the answer document must be completed before test day. So it should have already have been completed. So for example, Let me just show you what that looks like. So all of this information here should have been already completed. So the information on page 1 of the answer document, the information here should have already been completed. All this should have been completed. All of this should have been completed. So none of this is to be done the day of the test. All of this needs to be completed before test day. The only thing the student needs to do on test day is to complete this part, and that's the test. Complete the test, and we're going to talk about this at some point. All right. So reading verbal instructions, let's look at that part. So to ensure standardized conditions, room supervisors must read the verbal instructions loudly, clearly, and exactly as written. This ensures all examinees receive consistent, accurate instructions. Read aloud only those instructions in the shaded boxes. So if I go back to the tab where all of you must begin, you'll see shaded boxes. So you've got to read the shaded boxes. Now, you must have looked at this in advance so you'll know what all this stuff means. So it says verify everyone has stopped. If an examinee has translated test directions, collect them with the test booklet and so on. All right. So another thing I got to mention is the translated test directions is a secure document. So you got to make sure you get these back at the end of testing. All right. Then do not read aloud text in parentheses. So anything that's not bolded, anything that's not shaded, you don't read. Pause frequently and wait for examinees to finish the task before proceeding. Look at examinees to be sure they are following the instructions. Read the correct instructions for your test room, paying close attention to the timing code. So it's very important you have those sticky notes and prompts for writing rooms versus those with no writing rooms. So we don't have the writing test. We only have a no writing test. Perform all tasks only when directed to do so. Okay, so let's talk about English learner supports. So if you have timing code 6, that's where you're going to have your English learners. But there are going to be English learners with disabilities in other timing codes. But this is specifically talking about English learner supports. If an examinee is authorized to use a word-to-word bilingual dictionary, and this is important, if an examinee is authorized to use a word-to-word bilingual dictionary and or translated test directions, note the following. Using dictionary or translated test directions without authorization is prohibited. It is examinee's responsibility to bring an approved dictionary. Now, your school will probably have the word-to-word dictionary. Now, it's a word-to-word dictionary. It's not a dictionary with definitions. It's a word-to-word dictionary. So it must be an approved word-to-word dictionary, though. Now, most schools will provide it. If your school, now you got to check with your test coordinator. If your school does not provide the word-to-word dictionary, then it's the student's responsibility to bring it. The examinee may not bring a copy of translated test directions. Only ACT provided translated test directions you hand out on test day may be used. Okay, so you will get a group of translated test directions, and the students get those if that's an approved and authorized accommodation. Go to the next page. The dictionary and or translated test directions may be kept on the examinee's desk and used throughout testing, all the tests. Writing or marking anything in the dictionary and or translated test directions is prohibited behavior. This is important. So one of the things you're going to see prior to testing is this. So let's go prior to testing. Before testing begins, you must confirm that the examinee's dictionary is an approved ACT authorized bilingual word-to-word dictionary. An unapproved dictionary cannot be used. 2, inspect. So you got to flip through this. You got to flip through the dictionary. Inspect, flip through the examinee's dictionary and confirm that there is nothing written, nothing highlighted nothing enclosed in it. If there is, the examinee must store the dictionary out of sight and cannot use it. Using or accessing a notated dictionary during testing is prohibited behavior. So if the examinee brings their own dictionary, you got to flip through it. There cannot be anything highlighted. There cannot be anything written in it. If there are any handouts in it, you take those out. But if there's any writing or highlighting, they cannot use it. But you can provide them with a school purchased word-to-word dictionary. But again, even a school's word-to-word dictionary cannot be highlighted, cannot have any writings in it. Okay, now only one dictionary can be used for the entire test. They cannot have two or more. Only one dictionary can be used for the entire test. Okay, now, so prior to testing, you had to check the dictionaries. After testing, you got to do the same thing. So first of all, you're going to collect all the translated test directions. So if you distributed 6, you need 6 back. If you distributed 7, you need 7 back. Okay, now you got to go through all of the dictionaries and you got to verify that all dictionaries used during testing to confirm that nothing is written or enclosed in them. So you make sure that no students wrote anything in them, that no student highlighted or no student put anything in them. Okay, now if they did, when you go to the irregularity section, they talk about what to do. So if the student actually writes in the dictionary during testing, that's a prohibitive behavior. So in irregularities, they talk about what to do with that student. Okay, now let's go to begin testing. All right, so after all examinees have been admitted, seated, and have a pencil, greet the examinees and make any general announcements, then begin the verbal instructions. All right, now we do no writing, so you're going to read this part. You're not going to read this part. You're going to read this part. Then you would say anything that's in bold. Now, let me say about cell phones and smartwatches and all that. So ACT's policy is that they can turn them in. As long as it's turned off, they can have it on their body. That's not EBR's policy. So you must use EBR's policy. So EBR's policy says that there is no cell phone or electronic device within the classroom, within the testing room. So all cell phones, all electronic devices must be removed from the student prior to them entering the room, the testing room. So just you for this one, even though you have to say verbatim what's there, for the cell phone issue, for the electronic devices, you're gonna have to reword these to make it match EBR's policy. All right. And then also during breaks, they cannot have cell phones during breaks. So if they're on a cell phone during breaks, then that's prohibited behavior and their test is voided. Okay, so make sure you read everything that's there. For the cell phone policy, you're gonna have to reword this. All right, go to the next page, page 56. So remember, everybody, all of you are going to go to this page and read the same thing. All timing codes will start here, and that's on page 54. Page 54. So then you go to the next page, and you continue reading. So it says clear the desk, except for a number 2 pencil, and then it says a complete list of prohibited behaviors are provided in. So each student got a taking the test, ACT test. So that was the thing they used to complete this section here, this part of the answer document. So in that taking the test was a list of prohibited behaviors. They're just here, just giving a summary of some of them. So you may not. So it says this, in addition to reminders I've already given you about electronic devices, alarms, and and clear desk, note the following behaviors that can also result in dismissal. You may not fill in or alter responses to any multiple choice question or continue to write or alter the essay. We don't do essays after time is called. So this includes fixing stray marks. So on your on the answer document, when they go to test 2, so remember when they go to test 2 on the answer document, they in this test 1 there's 75 questions. If they're on test 2, they cannot come back to test 1 and fill in ovals. If you notice that they filled in ovals, that's a dismissal. Their test is voided and they cannot do the makeup. So if they're on test 2, they must stay on test 2. They cannot work ahead, they cannot go back. They must be working only on test 2. They must be working only on test 3, whatever test they're supposed to be working on. Now, let's continue this little part here that I was mentioning. So remember, if they're on test 2, then they can only be working on test 2. All right, so remember, on one of the forms you got to fill out, one of the pages of this room report that you have to fill out is on this page here. So in one of the videos that you were provided, you were told what to do with these little boxes here, 1, 2, 3, 4. These little boxes represent the test. So this is test 1, this is test 2, this is test 3, this is test 4. When a student, let's say, is starting test 2, you walking around and you are glancing to about how many of these from test 1 they did not answer. So they're working on test 2 there, and you notice that there's about 8. Now you do not stop the student and count these things. You're just estimating just by looking about how many they left unanswered. So let's say they left 8 unanswered. So you'd put an 8 here for that student. So they're working on test 2, and let's say the end of test 2, you're walking around again, or test 3, doesn't matter. You're walking around again, and you notice that test 1, all of them are answered. But you said earlier that there were 8 answered. So then at that point, you need to call the test coordinator, have the proctor, have someone get the test coordinator, tell that test coordinator the situation, and then the test coordinator will dismiss the student for prohibited behavior. And the test will be voided, and that student will not be able to do the makeup. All right, so that's what this little part here is implying. You may not fill in or alter responses to any multiple choice question after time has been called. Okay, and so use this to help you to determine if students went back to a previous test and answered any questions. That is prohibited behavior, and the student is dismissed. You may not look at any section of the test outside of the designated time for that test. So if they're on test 2, they must stay on test 2. They cannot look back on test 1. They cannot go forward on test 3. You may not give or receive assistance by any means. This includes looking at another person's test. The test is confidential and remains so even after the test is complete. You may not remove any materials from the test room. You may not discuss or share test questions, answers, or test form identification numbers during the test administration, during breaks, or after the test. So even after the test, students cannot be talking with each other about these questions. You may not disclose test questions or answers in any way or at any time, including through social media, in whole or part. Eating, drinking, and the use of tobacco or receiving materials or reading materials are not permitted in the test room. So again, one of the things they cannot bring is reading materials. So if they finish and you're giving 2 tests, remember this is accommodations, and you're giving 2 tests today, then they cannot be reading material. They just wait until the next test. If you are observed or suspected of engaging in prohibited behavior, you will be dismissed and your test will not be scored. All right, and then do you have any questions? All right, then at that point, I will now hand you your answer document. Do not mark in it until I give you instructions. So at that point, you give them their answer document. Make sure that you're looking at their barcode label. This barcode label will have their name on it, and it matches this, their name they put here. If there's no barcode label, then make sure that block U is coded. Block U is their ACT ID. So there's no barcode label. They have to have an ACT ID there. That's done by the test coordinator. If none of these are done, at the end of testing, just let the test coordinator know. Still let the student take the test, but after testing, just let the test coordinator know that both of these don't have anything. So there's no barcode label, then this must be completed. If there's a barcode label, then this is not completed. All right, and then you continue on with this. So make sure you read all of this before testing, and during testing you read this. Don't stray from whatever is on these shaded regions. All right, and then on page 58, you go to page 58 and you continue. You will say I will keep the official time, and then the next sentence says, remember to keep your answer document flat on your desk and place it that others cannot see it. When I tell you to stop at the end of each test, put your pencil down immediately and look up at me. If you finish before I call time, remain quiet in your seat. Do not engage in any disruptive activity. All right, now at that point, if you're timing code 1, you go to page 59. If you're timing code 2, you go to page 68. So the timing code's important. That's why it's important that the test coordinator have put the sticky note here. If you're timing code 3, page 77. Timing code 5 is page 86. Timing code 6 is page 97. Timing code 7 is page 106. And timing code 8 is page 115. All right, so if your timing code, let's say 7, I already have a sticky note. So I take this sticky note and I go to my timing code. My timing code is timing code 7. That's time and a half over multiple days. So normally what happens there is the student will take the test, then take test 2 the next day or whenever it is. Now it's time and a half, so it is possible your test coordinator is going to put timing code 1 and 2 today in one day, or it could be that they could do timing test 1 one day, test 2 the next day, and then put 3 and 4 in one day. So that is possible they could do that. Okay, now so then let's say you have timing code 7. Remember, you've read this in advance. You know what you're about to say. Okay, so notice that these verbal instructions are written for administering one test per session over multiple days. If you administer more than one test in the same session, adjust the instructions accordingly. Each test must be completed in one session without stopping the clock. If you choose to administer more than one test per session means per day. If you choose to administer more than one test per day, per session, you may allow examinees a break between tests. So let's say you give test 1 and test 2 in one day, then you can do a break between 1 and 2. Okay. But they cannot have lunch between 1 and 2. They just call it a break between tests. All right. Do not continue until you have completed the verbal instructions from the beginning. So this little part here, where all timing codes start, you got to do this first. All right. So then anything shaded, you read through them. So it says test 1 is English. Do not begin work until I tell you. So you read all this. The time's important, so you must make sure they understand that test 1 is 70 minutes. 70. So you have 17 minutes to work on the test. Open your booklet to test 1, read the directions, and begin work. All right, so the beginning of the work, then make a note somewhere around here when because it says here you have 70 minutes to begin work. So it says during the test do the following: record the start time and calculate warning and stop times. Then document the minutes actually used by examinees in the administration report. So let's say you start at 7:30. All right, so everybody starts at the same time. So you start at 7:30. Then remember, Usually with accommodations, there's no more than 8 students. If the students have small group, no more than 8. So for each student though, let's go back to this page. For each student, you're going to indicate how many minutes it took each one to complete the test. So if it took student 1 30 minutes, you put 30 minutes here. If it took the second student 42 minutes, you put 42, and so on. But everybody starts at the same time. Complete your seating diagram, but wait until break to verify any serial numbers. So right here, we're talking about this right here. So remember the serial numbers. So you're only going to have about 8 students. So you're going to put the student name here. So use this. Now MC stands for multiple choice. W stands for writing. We don't do writing. I would put the student's name here. Now the serial number of the test goes here. So put the student name, and if you know the serial number right away from before you gave it to the student, put it here, or just wait after the break to put the serial number. But the serial number must be listed for each student. All right, so just don't put the name. You must put the serial number. The serial number is required. All right, and then move around the room to monitor prohibited behavior. All right, now for this particular timing code, for timing code 7, it does say you must mention 30 minutes remaining. So if all examinees are still working when 30 minutes remain on the timer, say 30 minutes, you have 30 minutes remaining. Then it says if all examinees are still working when 5 minutes remain, or if any examinees are still working when 5 minutes remain, then you say you have 5 minutes remaining. Then after time is called, you say stop, put your pencil down, close your test booklet, and look up at me. All right, so then it says verify everyone has stopped. If examinees are scheduled to take the next test, which is math, the next day or in a later day, collect all test materials individually for each examinee before dismissal. So remember, you must collect the translated test directions. You must collect and put them in the test book. Must put them in the test booklet. Collect the test booklet. Do not dismiss examinees until all translated test directions are accounted for. If an examinee used a bilingual dictionary during the test, inspect through it to confirm that nothing is written or enclosed in it. If you find something written or enclosed, dismiss the examinee for prohibited behavior and determine whether the dictionary should be confiscated. So that's a discussion between you and the test coordinator. And dismiss examinees by saying testing will resume on, you give them the date, the next day when this is to be given, when math is to be given, and a given time. Test materials may not be removed from this test room. Remember, discussing or sharing test content, test form identification numbers, or any answers is prohibited, including on social media. You may not access your cell phone or other electronic devices until you leave this test site. Okay, so that'll be test 1. Then you do the same thing for test 2. And remember, the times are different. So for test 2, this is math is 90 minutes. Now when you go to test 2, that's where they use a dictionary. You got to make sure they're using an approved, calculator. You got to make sure they are using an approved calculator. Usually your school will provide the calculator, but if a student brings their own, it's got to be an approved ACT calculator. So you received in your training by your test coordinator, you received this calculator policy. So make sure that the calculator the students are using is not one of these. So it's TI with these models, Hewlett-Packard with these models, Casio with these models, or any of this other stuff that's right here. They cannot use, for example, electronic writing pads or pen input devices. So these are the following types of calculators are permitted, but only after they are modified as noted. So these are permitted calculators. So any scientific calculator, and your test coordinator received a list of approved calculators. So usually it's going to be a scientific calculator. That would be a permitted calculator. All right. So, but when you go to test 2, it does say you must check the calculator. So in examinees, let's talk about test 2. When examinees report to for the next day of testing, be sure examinees receive their own materials. So make sure their answer document is their own answer document. Individually hand examinees the answer documents and test booklets. Do not give them to other students to give to other students. You must give each one their own test booklet. If an examinee is using translated test directions, hand them out with the test booklet. If an examinee is approved to use a bilingual dictionary, inspect through it to confirm that there is nothing written, highlighted, or enclosed in it. If there is, the dictionary cannot be used. Using or accessing a notated dictionary during testing is prohibited behavior. All right, so then remember, anything in bolded you you read. So you just continue reading what's in bolded. Now, it does say this. Test 2 is math. All problems on the math test can be solved without a calculator. However, you are allowed to use a calculator in this test and may get it out now. You are responsible for knowing if your calculator is permitted. If you use a prohibited calculator, you will be dismissed and your answer document will not be scored. Do not share your calculator with another examinee. If you need to use your backup calculator, raise your hand. You may have only one calculator on your desk or in operation at a time. If your calculator has games or other functions, you may not use them during the test. Keep your calculator flat on your desk. Are there any questions? All right, and then you tell them the time, and then they begin the test. So remember, you got to tell them when 30 minutes is remaining, when 5 minutes are remaining. Now remember, this is timing code 7. Each timing code's different, so you got to make sure you're reading through this. But for the math, it's always going to be the same about the calculator. You need to make sure they understand this little part about the calculator. Then you go to the reading, whenever that is, the next day. So everything's the same about the dictionary. You got to flip through it, make sure there's nothing in them, and so on. All right, and then you go to the science and do the same thing. If they're using a bilingual dictionary, you got to flip through it, and so on. All right. Now, at the end of the science test, end of test 4, which is science, it says this: verify everyone has stopped, and then continue by saying, remember, this is science, the test 4. I will now collect, and do no writing. I will now collect the answer documents, then I will collect all test booklets and not pass them in. You may not leave the room. Remain quietly in your seat until I have checked all documents. You may not access your cell phones or any electronic devices until you leave the test site. Okay, now, at the end of all tests, you need to confirm, individually collect the answer documents from each student. Confirm that they have signed the certification on the front of test 1. On the front of the test booklet. Confirm the answer document is signed. So you got to make sure that they signed the answer document. Confirm the room form is gridded. So on the answer document, you got to make sure right here that the room form is gridded. So this is gridded. They have something here, and also this has to be gridded as well. This is what they're talking about the certification. So you got to make sure that when they've done all 4 tests, that this is signed right here. So they do the certification, and they sign, and they date. All right. Then stack all answer documents so they face the same direction. Verify the number of answer documents collected equals the number of examinees. And then individually collect the test booklets. Confirm the certification is copied. Confirm the test booklet is signed. Verify that the number of booklets collected equals the number distributed. So on your room form, they don't have it on this one, but on your room form, your room supervisor, let's say your room supervisor gave you 8 booklets. Then you need to make sure you have 8 at the end. Arrange the test booklet in sequential serial number order, and then keep the collected test materials where examinees do not have access. All right, now remember, no one may access the test booklets or answer documents once they've been collected. All right, now let's go to page 111. Okay, so on page 111, this is where the writing test occurs, but we don't do writing, so we're not going to do this. So this is not needed. All right, and then that's the end. So again, just make sure you know what timing code you use. So timing code 8 starts on page 115. So pretty much, except for the number of minutes, what you're going to say is going to be almost the same thing for each timing code. Okay, so the training part for accommodations is much longer than the training for standard time. So the training for standard time did not cover as much as the standard time. The training for standard time testing. Training for standard time testing does not cover as much as the accommodation testing is. So I'm going to stop this with this training. So this will be called part 1, and then we're going to do another one for part 2. So this was part 1 of your training.